So today we are continuing with learning target 3A, graphing linear functions. Okay, this time we're going to focus on identifying the key feature of intercepts. Okay, and we're going to talk about how when we use intercepts we can graph our linear functions. Okay, so if you guys could turn to the section where it says intercepts. Okay, this should be about the second page. Okay. So we've talked about intercepts before in the beginning of the school year when given a graph, okay? And so it's coming back again as we're graphing linear functions, as we're graphing lines, okay? So an x-intercept, right, is where the graph touches or intersects the x-axis. And when we write our x-intercept, the notation is our x is going to be a number, okay? And our y value is going to be 0. Okay? Our y-intercept then is where the graph touches or intersects the y-axis. Okay. And the notation for that, our x value is going to be 0, okay, and the y value is going to be a number. Okay. So if you wanted to highlight some main things, right, x-intercept, we touch or intersect the x-axis, okay, and x is going to be a number. Okay. Y-intercept, okay, is then where the graph touches or intersects the y-axis, and y is going to be a number. Okay, so how do we find intercepts? Okay, so we're going to talk about finding intercepts from a graph, from a table, and from an equation. Okay, so from a graph, you look for where the graph touches the axis. Okay, so here I have a graph. Okay, the x-intercept is where it touches the x-axis. Okay, so here is the x-axis, and it touches it right here. Okay, so this is my x-intercept. Okay, so I'm going to write x. I'm going to use int as an abbreviation. Okay, so this point here, where it touches the x-axis, is 3, 0. 3, 0. Okay, and that is my x-intercept. Okay. The y-intercept is where it touches the y-axis. So here is the y-axis. Okay. Touches it right here. Okay. And that ordered pair is 0, 2. Okay. So note, x-intercept, x has a number, y is 0. Y-intercept, y has the number. Okay. So x-intercept and y-intercept. Okay, so I'm going to have you try this one here. Okay, so find the x and y-intercepts and then come back and check your answer. Okay, for your x-intercept, you should have gotten 8, 0, x-axis. This is where it touches it. Okay, for y-intercept, you should have gotten 0, -5. Here's the y-axis. Here is where it touches it. Okay. So what about if you're given a table? Okay, so in a table, to find the x-intercept, you're going to look for the opposite. You're going to look for where y is 0. Okay? And for the y-intercept, you're going to look for where x is 0. Okay, so I'm just going to highlight it. X-intercept, y is equal to 0. Y-intercept, x is equal to 0. Okay, so let's look. So here I have a table. This is my x column. This is my y. Could also be named domain and range. Could be input and output. Right? So you should know that those were the same thing. Okay, so x-intercept, I want to look for where y is equal to 0. Okay, so where's y 0? Right here. Okay, so this here is my x-intercept. Okay. 3, 0. Okay, so x-intercept is where y is 0. Okay, y-intercept I'm going to look for where x is equal to 0. Okay, so x here equal to 0 right here. So this is my y-intercept. 0, 2. Okay. So now I'm going to have you try this one here. Find the x and y intercepts. Sorry, I think there's a typo here. Okay, but find the x and y intercepts and then come back and check. Okay, so your x-intercept should be 4, 0, okay, because you're looking for where y is 0. Okay. Y-intercept's the opposite. You want where x is 0, so x is 0 here, goes with -4, so your y-intercept should be 0, -4. Okay. So what happens if you're given an equation? Okay, so in an equation, instead of looking at the graph or looking at the table and finding where it is, we're going to plug in and solve. Okay. So when we're given an equation, to find the x-intercept, you're going to plug in 0 for y, right? So y is 0, right? So plug in 0 for y, and you're going to solve for x, right? So y-intercept, you're going to plug in 0 for x, you're solving for y, right? So x-intercept, just think you're solving for x, right? Y-intercept, all right, you're solving for y, right? You're plugging in 0. Okay. So here I have 2x plus 3y equals 12. Okay. So for my x-intercept, okay, it says to plug in 0 for y. Okay, so I'm going to replace this y with a 0. 2x plus 3 times 0 equals 12. Okay. So remember, x-intercept, I'm going to replace that y value with 0 and solve. Okay, so 2x stays the same. 3 times 0 is 0 equals 12. 2x plus 0 is just 2x equals 12. Divide by 2, I get x equals 6. Okay, so that means in my ordered pair, my x value is 6. And since I plugged in 0 for y, 0 is my y value. Okay, so here's my x-intercept. 0. Okay. Y-intercept, okay, tells me to plug in 0 for x and solve for y. So I'm going to replace this x here with 0 and solve for y. Mm. 2 times 0 is 0. So 0 plus 3y equals 12. 0 plus 3y is just 3y. Okay. Then I divide by 3, y equals 4. Okay. So I plugged in 0 for x, so that means my x value is 0, and I solved for y right now, so that's 4. So my y-intercept is 0, 4. Okay. So I'm going to have you try this next one, and then come on back to check your answer. Okay, for your x-intercept, you should have gotten 8, 0. You should have plugged in 0 for the y and then solved. Okay, and you should get x equals 8. So that means 8, 0. X equals 8, 0 you plugged in for y. Okay, your y-intercept should be 0, -20. Right, so for y-intercept, we plug in 0 for x and solve for y. Okay, so I plugged in 0 here for the x. Okay, solved, I got y equals -20. So since I plugged in 0 for x, it's 0 for the x and -20 for the y. Okay? So that's how we find intercepts from a graph, from a table, and from an equation. Okay, so now we're going to use this, right, to graph. Okay, so if you guys can flip a little bit further, okay, and go to graphing using intercepts. Okay? So based on what we learned before, we technically only need 2 points to graph a line. Okay? So here it says, how many points do we need to graph a line? We only need 2. Okay? And so previously what we did is we graphed our y-intercept, right, using slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. We graphed our y-intercept and used the slope to help us find the next point. Okay? Another thing we can do is we can now find 2 points by using the x and y intercepts. Okay, and so that's what we're going to do, right? So here I have 2 problems. This is standard form. Okay. In a previous lesson, we would change it into slope-intercept form. Okay? But now, one way that is easier to graph when it's in standard form is to use intercepts. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the x and y intercept. Okay, so I'm going to find the x-intercept first. Okay? And remember, to find the x-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for y and solve for x. Okay? Right. So remember, when we find our x-intercept, we're solving for x, so we're going to plug in 0 for y. Right. So this is 0, right? So it's negative 2x plus 0 equals 16, which is just negative 2x equals 16. Right. I want x by itself, so I divide by negative 2. I get x equals negative 8. Right. So my x-intercept is negative 8 comma 0. I have 1 point now for my line. Right? Then, for my y-intercept, okay, we plug in 0 for x, we solve for y. Right? So this time, I'm going to replace x with 0, and I'm going to solve for y. Right? So this is 0, negative 2 times 0 is 0. Plus 4y equals 16. This means 4y equals 16. Divide by 4. I know y equals 4. So that means my ordered pair is going to be 0, comma 4 for my y-intercept. Okay? 0 because I plugged in x for 0, and then I solved for y. Okay, there you go. Now I have 2 points. That's all I need to graph a line. Okay, so x-intercept is negative 8, 0. That is right here. Y-intercept is 0, comma 4. Okay. And all I need is 2 points to graph a line. I have my 2 points. All I have to do now is connect the dots. Okay. And then this here was my x-intercept. This here was my y-intercept. Okay. That's it. All right, so that way, instead of changing into slope-intercept form, this is another way we can graph our line. Okay, so now I'm going to do the next one here. I have x minus y equals 3. I'm going to graph again by using my x and y intercept. Okay, so let's start with our x-intercept. Okay. I'm going to plug in 0 for y, so I can find my x. Okay. So x minus 0 is just x. Okay. So boom, x equals 3. So that means my x-intercept is 3, comma 0. Okay. 3 because I just solved x equals 3. And then 0 for the y because I plugged in 0 for y for x-intercepts. Right. Then I'm going to do y-intercept. Okay. So for y-intercept, we plug in 0 for x. Right. Ooh, it's not focusing. Right. And then we solve for y. Okay. So 0 minus y is just negative y. Okay. I want y by itself, not negative y. So to get rid of this negative, since this is negative 1 times y, I'm going to get rid of it by dividing. Okay. So I get y equals negative 3. So my y-intercept is going to be 0, negative 3. Okay. 0 because I plugged in 0 for x, negative 3 because I solved that for y. Okay. Now I have my 2 points. I can graph my line. Okay. So 3, comma 0 is right here for my x-intercept. Y-intercept is 0, comma negative 3. That's right here. Okay. And then all I have to do is okay, connect the dots. Okay, lines go on forever. Okay, so please make sure you have those arrows there. Okay, so let's flip. Okay, so these were in standard form. Okay, what about in slope-intercept form? Okay, so we already learned how to use it, graph it using the slope and our y-intercept. This time, since we're practicing on finding our intercepts, we're going to graph it by finding the intercepts. Okay, The y-intercept is easy enough. I don't have to solve it, right? Because since this is y equals mx plus b, and b is my y-intercept, I don't have to solve for it, right? It's already going to be 0, -5. Okay. Right. So that one's easy enough for us. Okay. Right. And you would see that if you did plug in 0 here, you would find that y equals -5, so that's why. Okay. My x-intercept, right, we're going to plug in 0 for y, so 0 equals -x minus 5, and we're going to solve for x. Okay. To get rid of this -5, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. Okay. So I added 5 to both sides. And then to get rid of this -1 times x, I'm going to divide by -1. Okay, so 5 divided by -1 is -5. Then this becomes positive x. So my x-intercept then is going to be -5, 0. Okay. 0 for y, because that's what we plugged in, and we just solved x. Okay. So now I can graph my points. Okay. Y-axis, x-intercept, -5, 0. Y-intercept, y-axis, 0, -5. Okay, and then I can connect my points. So here's my x-intercept where it crosses the x-axis. This is my y-intercept where it touches the y-axis. Okay? Right? And you could see then, I could have graphed it, right, where we normally do our y-intercept, right? Since our slope is -1, that means down 1, right 1, down 1, right 1, down 1, right 1, down 1. So you can see that it matches, right? So whether we use to graph with a slope and our y-intercept, or whether we use our intercepts to graph, you should still get the same line. Okay, so let's do this last one here. Okay, so again, this is slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. B is our y-intercept. Okay, so I already know that my y-intercept is going to be 0, 2. Right? So y-intercept is where we plug in 0 for x and solve. Right? So if I plugged in 0 here, this would just be 0, so it's be y equals 2. And that's why it's 0, 2. Right? X-intercept, we plug in 0 for y, so 0 equals 2x plus 2. Okay. I'm going to subtract 2 on both sides. I get -2 equals 2x. Divide by 2 on both sides, I get -1 equals x. Okay, so my x-intercept is going to be -1, 0. Okay. -1 because we just solved that x equals -1. And then 0 because we plugged in 0 for y to solve. Okay. So I have 0, 2. So 0, 2 is here. I have -1, 0. Okay. All we need is 2 points to graph a line. Right. We can connect our dots. Highlight for us. Okay. And as you can see, if we graph like we did before, y-intercept at 2, slope is also 2, so up 2, 1, 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, and you can see that it matches. Okay. So that's it on graphing using intercepts. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. Have a great rest of the day. Bye, guys.